Greetings, confessors. Welcome to this week's Midweek Refuel, where we endeavor to bring you sound biblical teaching for today's spiritual warfare. Don't forget to hit the rumble or the like or whatever it is on the platform that you're watching, and be sure to subscribe. It helps us get the word out. We will be continuing our reading of Augustine's Confessions in Book 1, Chapter 14, and we'll be reading on through to the end of Book 1. So that means next week we'll be starting in Book 2. During the COVID nightmare that we all lived through and the QAnon phenomenon, I constantly heard people talk about the black hats and the white hats, and we all kept hearing the white hats were coming for the black hats. And this, of course, is a callback to the old American Western movie prior to the spaghetti westerns. The spaghetti westerns were the ones that we remember with Clint Eastwood in them. And in the older movies, the good guys wore white hats and the bad guys wore black hats. And it was very easy to tell the difference between the two. I remember being real little and watching black and white reruns of The Lone Ranger and Zorro when I was a little boy. And it was always very easy to tell who the good guys were from the bad guys. Good and evil had an obvious dichotomy. They were hostile to each other. One had horns and a bifurcated tail and stood on your left shoulder, while the other had wings and a halo and stood on your right shoulder. This all started to change after the original Star Wars movies. It started to change a little before that, but it became very obvious after the Star Wars movies had wrapped up. Star Wars had Darth Vader dressed up like a space Nazi, all in black with a demonic voice and breathing apparatus, and so it was easy to tell who the bad guy was. And Luke, of course, had that innocent child look about him and wore an old stained tunic. And even though the tunic was stained, it was obviously a light-colored tunic. Star Wars' appeal was its commonality with the old school Westerns. In fact, Star Wars, the original three, were actually nothing but Westerns in space once you get down to it. Good was obvious. Evil was obvious. But very soon after these movies, in this wonderful time of innocence, we started to be introduced to what we called the anti-hero. Yes, we had seen the anti-hero before in movies like Fistful of Dollars and A Man with No Name, but they were odd movies. They were peculiar. And they were odd movies that were enjoyed for their oddness or their uniqueness and the feelings of dissonance that we felt while watching those particular movies. They were, to be honest, they were a bit cathartic because they showed that even a gruff, normal human, or a human who begins with a bad situation, can, when the time calls for it, rise up and achieve great things. This is much different from the anti-hero of the late 80s and the 90s. Now we have had anti-heroes from the beginning, but they cycle in and out just like fads. Now, we have had anti-heroes from the beginning, but they cycle in and out of normal just like fads do. Homer had them, Byron had them, so they aren't new to the 80s and 90s. I don't mean to imply that's the only time they've been around, but I have seen the fads cycle within my lifetime. In those years, I remember movies like Lethal Weapon or From Dusk Till Dawn, and in those movies, in those films, there were the supposed good guys versus the supposed bad guys, but really, morally, how they acted when they weren't fighting each other, you really couldn't tell the difference between what a good guy and a bad guy was based on moral principles. The only way to tell was which side they were fighting on. One side was aligned with the laws of the land, while the other side rebelled against the letter of the law. For some of you younger people, it was kind of like playing World of Warcraft. Whichever side you on was the right side, and they had their reasons for fighting. So it was very hard to tell who the good guys were. Anything not spelled out in the law of the land was free game. So you could do anything personally, morally, or immorally that you wanted to do, as long as it didn't conflict with the written down, hard-coded law of the society that you were in, whether fictional or real. In other words, the classic ideas of natural law or God's law were thrown out the window and were replaced with a new type of hero that this hero could womanize, they could stay drunk, they could curse, they could smoke, they could live totally depraved personal lives, but still be considered in these new movies a hero because he stopped bank robbers from robbing banks. This, of course, was a dangerous path, and I don't know if they were intended social programming, but they have had their effects on how we see good and evil and how our culture sees good and evil. Then things got even worse than the 80s and the 90s. It wasn't good enough that we had to make everyone take off their black and white hats because it might offend somebody, and where everybody now wears gray hats. Nope, we had to kill the hero off for good. Comic books and movies started coming out left and right, dismantling the good guys and undermining the good guys, and making sure everybody knew the good guys were in actuality bad guys. The previous blurring of the lines with gray hats was not accomplishing the societal changes that I'm sure Tavistock and Frankfurt had wished for us, and the Marxist Satanist agenda needed to happen in order for them to achieve their ends. So they had to make good guys bad guys, which was a precursor to the last 10 to 20 years of making bad guys good guys. And so the great inversion began. We were told in the 70s and the 80s during the Satanic Panic, that we were told that there was backward masking in the music and crosses were shown upside down, and this was all getting us ready for a greater inversion. That was symbolic of what was going to happen morally in the country. And so the great inversion began. Isaiah 5:20-21 says this to us: "Woe to those who call evil good." Woe. Woe. That's a strong word. To bring woe is to bring down fire and brimstone on the head. Woe to those who call evil good and call good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. I remember reading the famous graphic novel, probably many of you have read it as well, called The Watchmen, and realizing very quickly that what I was being exposed to was the beginning of something horrible, something wrong. It was an entertaining book, no doubt. It was a well thought out book, no doubt. But something inside me just flinched at the entertainment I was exposing myself to. The Watchmen title, of course, comes from the age-old question, who watches the Watchmen? And we need to ask those questions, especially in a Maoist China or a Hitler's Germany or a Lenin's Russia. The book is deceptively simple. The superheroes are nothing but super-powered, flawed humans. I believe there's an Amazon show out now that has the just absolutely worst flawed human superheroes that it could possibly exist. And at first glance, it is a welcome warning against letting frail humans have too much power. I get that. But on further reflection, it plants within us a distrust of all authority, good or bad, whether righteous or not. Like the anti-heroes of the 80s, the superheroes in The Watchmen are lewd, vulgar, drunken, abusive messes. And if you are paying attention to what you are reading, it becomes all too clear that Alan Moore, the author of The Watchmen, is involved in some pretty dark occultic practices. So there was an intent behind the book. Him being a practicing occultist, he is very much centered on the intent of his will and making that will become reality in this time and place. An article in The Atlantic by a man named James Parker is actually subtitled, "How Pop Culture Fell Under a Comic Book Writer's Strange Spell." So this man spotted it. In fact, many of our most famous writers and most famous authors nowadays are into things that society used to shun, and that God, in fact, tells us to stay well clear of. There are very dark forces working to create common ways of thought, bringing negative thought into the masses on a grand scale, and bringing this thought within a large portion of society in order to create the spirit of the age, or zeitgeist, or even, in their terms, an egregore of massive potential. We're watching this egregore work currently in our culture, and we've seen some cultures like Russia fight desperately against it. And many are ignorantly just going along with it. So many, a generation now has been raised in it like the frog in the bottom of the vat, that they don't really even know a society without this egregore on top of it. Bill Clinton was an anti-hero, and he made many things that were once considered vulgar or taboo in America common playground knowledge. We had people say that what he did in his personal life did not affect what kind of president he could be. It was amazing to watch liberal feminists rally to this man's defense after this man used his position of power to gain sexual thrills and commit adultery. I couldn't believe watching the feminists. That's when I knew that feminism had gone completely off the rails. That was the first sign that feminism had lost its way. I was in college during his second term in office, and I heard many females say they were voting for him because he was cute. These were college people, the educated in society. That's why whenever the immoral party brags about them having the most graduates, you can go, there goes the republic, right? Anywho, soon after this, these stories like Wicked, if you remember that, trying to make the evil witch of the West to be a good person, stories like Wicked started to come out of the woodwork left and right. The Watchmen and its ilk had indeed turned good guys into bad guys, while Wicked tried to convince us that bad guys were actually misunderstood good guys, or at the very least to be sympathized with. And the Rolling Stones all told us what that was about, didn't they? They sung Sympathy for the Devil, and that became a theme song of a lot of literature and many television shows. Can you imagine a film like The Wizard of Oz coming out in today's sick, woke culture? Ding dong, the witch is dead. She's gone where the goblins go. Below, 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 ho, yo, yo, ho. Let's open up and sing. Today we would tell those munchkins how horrible and judgmental they were, and who were they to judge and to quit acting like white Christian old men. Disney tried to do the same with Maleficent, didn't they? And the list, of course, goes on and on and on ad nauseum. As Augustine will say in today's reading, woe to you, river of human custom. Woe to you, zeitgeist. Woe to you, egregore. I am trying to build a faith community and get enough people on the faith wave to counter the egregore wave. Even though he says previously that he didn't learn very well because his heart was not in it, Augustine, he seems to have picked up enough to be able to criticize what he did learn through his new lens of Jesus Christ. Augustine begins to see the negative effects that anti-heroes have on the culture. He writes, quote, "It would be truer to say that Homer did indeed make up the stories he tells, but ascribe divine attributes to depraved humans. In this way, he hoped that their depraved doings would be thought no depravity at all, and that whoever did the same would be seen as imitating not a pack of bandits, but the heavenly gods," unquote. One of his acquaintances, speaking about Jupiter's thunderings and womanizing, says, Thundering's no job for me, but I did the other thing cheerfully enough. And there is the problem with anti-heroes, isn't it? It lets you be anti without ever being a hero. Anti-heroes do not encourage heroism, but rather they encourage anti-ism in a culture. And when you begin to drink that wine, you become drunk with your own stupidity and foolishness. And don't we see that taking place on the streets? You picture yourself as a hero when you are really just an anti. Augustine says, our teachers, he says, quote, our teachers had imbibed that wine too well and used the words to serve it to us also. The last 4 years needed heroes desperately, but what we got instead was 80% of the population looking around cowardly at each other, repeating the Nuremberg excuse, I was just following orders, as though that somehow made them anti-heroes. I remember watching good people online trying to persuade their friends and family from being the lemmings that they were lining up to be. But I watched the lemmings pounce on any and all perceived failures of the actual heroes in order to keep their heads firmly planted in the sand. If you made a grammar mistake in an online forum, it didn't matter how cogent your argument was, the mockers and cowards dismissed you as an ignorant nuisance. I would like to think this is peculiar to the internet age, but Augustine tells us this, quote, this was the arena in which I was to fight, and I was more afraid of committing an error of grammar or pronunciation than I was of feelings of jealousy that would arise in me if I made such a mistake and the others did not, unquote. The problem, as I see it for our time, is that white hats and black hats have been made taboo, and the foundation of transcendental natural law has been intentionally withheld from the public sphere in order to create an animalistic and desire-driven humanity that isn't much above an animal, that can be manipulated, controlled, and harnessed like an animal by nefarious forces which seek to enslave us by taking from us the very tools that we need to protect liberty and faith. In other words, we have been told there is only one hat, and it is black. And it is good no matter what the person wearing it does, says, or thinks. As we step away from natural law and walk away willingly from God-given law, the slow decline into subjective, imaginative human desire being made lawful consumes us and eats away at the very thing that makes us human. Each year, ones who practice filthiness and create new ways to be filthy convince more and more people who have abandoned the transcendental values, unhooked from the transcendental God, that they are just good black hats like everyone else. Black hats matter, it seems. First, the family was dissolved, then sodomy was embraced, then cross-dressers were invited to teach at the libraries, and now youth-attracted pedophiles is their actual name, argue for their societal approval and to receive their good black hat as well. And let's be honest, unattached to the laws of God, why not? Honestly, if you remove the law of the transcendental God, then you and I and those in power, no matter how smart or how many degrees they have, literally just make it up as we go. And at the end of the day, no matter how craftily our atheist and secular philosophers craft for a secular morality, there is no foundation at all to build it on. Anything goes. And anything not built on a foundation is easily shoved over. If God is dead, as Nietzsche laments, then God help us all. The madman with the fading lantern screaming in the street is all that we have left. Time to kindle a fire and a great awakening. There is good news, though. The white hats, they always win. The reason that they always win is simply because the human spirit is designed from the ground up to return to its foundation. The darker the night, the brighter the candle. Even today, we are witnessing a spiritual desire to return to the foundation. This desire is being abused by many, and it is being used for gain by many. But the desire is still good news for those that hold the truth of Christ out unashamedly and hold his cross up as the bronze snake in the desert for the world to see. Everything but truth will dissolve in the light of his presence. And as we spend eternity with him, his light will perfect us continually, and we will finally know as we are known. The Bible says that in the last days, the love of many will grow cold because of the proliferation of wickedness. I have found myself tiring of the absurdity and getting sick of the literal madhouse that we are living in. But this I know, God whittles the army down and saves his people from slavery, not in spite of the impassable ocean or the small numbers, but miraculously through it and because of it. All human hope is gone. And for that we can thank God. It is time to watch the King do his work. It is always darkest before the dawn, and Christ has a robe of white and a crown of gold for all those who will pick up their crosses, say no to themselves, and join him in the suffering through which the universe is redeemed. Death is not an obstacle for us. It is just another Red Sea to cross through, or Gideon's army to fight with. Let's turn, if we will, to Book 1, chapters 14. It's page 20 in the Everyman's Library edition. Why then did I hate Greek literature, seeing as it too had poems of this sort? For Homer also is a skilled spinner of tales, and though his stories too are but vanity, he tells them very sweetly. But when I was a boy, Homer left a sour taste in my mouth. I suppose Greek boys feel much the same about Virgil when they are forced to learn him as I was made to learn Homer. It was the sheer difficulty of gaining a thorough grasp of a foreign language that cast gall, so to speak, over the sweet allurement of Greek myth and epic. I knew none of the words and was under constant threat of dire punishments to make me learn them. Previously, as a baby, I had been just as ignorant of Latin words, but I had learnt by paying attention to those around me and not through the fear of punishment. Indeed, my nurses had encouraged me gently, had made jokes and laughed and played with me and teased me. I learnt Latin not under pressure from others, on pain of being punished. My own heart pressed me to bring to light the ideas it had conceived, which would not have been possible if I had not learnt at least some words. I did not, however, learn them from Latin teachers, but from speakers. And I, in turn, learnt to express all my feelings in their ears. This is proof enough that unbridled curiosity is a more effective way of learning a language than constraint and compulsion. But it is in accordance with your laws, O God, the compulsion that keeps in check the flow of curiosity. All the way from the schoolteacher's cane to trials of the martyrs. It is in accordance with your laws. It is your laws that have power to add a health-giving admixture of bitterness that calls us back to you and away from the malady of pleasure which has caused us to stray from you. Hear my prayers, O Lord, and let not my soul grow weary. Under your instruction, let me not weary of confessing your mercies. You have rescued me from all the evil roads I have trodden and given me a sweetness surpassing all the pleasant bypaths I used to pursue. Let me have a mighty love for you. In my inmost being, let me hold tight to your hand, so that you may deliver me from every temptation to the very end. For you are, O Lord, are my King and my God. Whatever useful skills I acquired as a boy, I place at your service, speaking, writing, reading, counting. Let all of these skills serve you. As for those vain literary studies, it was you who were disciplining me when I learnt them, and vain as they were, through them you forgave me the sinful delights I took in them. In them too I learnt many useful words, but these can also be learnt through things that are not vain, and that is the safe path for boys to walk. Woe to you, river of human custom! Who shall withstand you? How long will you roll on and not run dry, sweeping the children of Eve to a great sea of terrors that can scarce be crossed by those who clamber on to the ark of the cross? Was it not in you that I read of Jove the thunderer and Jove the adulterer? He could scarcely be both, but so in the play he was. Thus his fictitious thundering acted as a pimp, providing a precedent for those who wish to imitate his adultery, for that was real enough. None, however, of these school teachers in their rhetoricians' gowns lends a sober ear when another man, one of their own, speaks up. These things are all Homer's inventions, says Cicero. He conferred upon the gods attributes that are properly human. I would rather he had ascribed divine qualities to us men. But it would be truer to say that Homer did indeed make up the stories he tells, but ascribes divine attributes to depraved humans. In this way, he hoped that their depraved doings would be thought no depravity at all, and that whoever did the same would be seen as imitating not a pack of bandits, but the heavenly gods. But you, river of hell, sweep away the children of men who pay to learn these things, and education is a big business, seeing as it is conducted in public in the town square in full view of the laws that award teachers a living allowance on top of their fees. As the waters crash over your boulders, your voice rings out. This is the way to learn to read and write. This is the way to get the eloquence you need to make your point and win over your hearers. I would not even recognize the words shower of gold and lap and deceived and vaults of heaven and so on, were it not for that scene of Terence's, where the young rake admires a wall painting of Jupiter deceiving Dana by sending the shower of gold into her lap, and follows the god's example in forcing his own attentions on a girl. What's a god, he says, seizing on Jupiter's actions as a divine sanction for his own sordid passion. Is this the one whose thunder shakes the vaults of heaven? And what am I? A mere mortal. Thundering's no job for me, but I did the other thing cheerfully enough. It is not that the words are more conveniently learnt because of this immoral episode, but rather that the immorality is more confidently committed because of the words. I do not hold the words responsible. They are just the choice and costly vessels that contain the wine of error. Our teachers had imbibed that wine too well and used the words to serve it to us also. If we refused to drink, out came the cane, and we were given no right of appeal to any sober judge. But yet, my God, in whose sight I may remember without fear, I confess that I was eager to learn these books, for they were the joy of my wretched life. This eagerness earned me the reputation of being a promising pupil. Let me, my God, speak a little of the mental powers you have given me and how I frittered them away on mere delusions. Our teachers set us the task of retelling the story of Juno's anger and resentment that she could not turn back from Italy the Trojan king. The rewards promised for this were enough to make my soul restless. Praise on the one hand, humiliation and the threat of beatings on the other. I had heard that no Juno ever made any such speech, but we were made to trace the poet's tale step by wandering step and to give a prose rendering of his verses, reproducing the speech as closely as possible. The prize went to the boy who made a show of anger and resentment, most in keeping with the dignity of his assumed character while clothing her thoughts in the most appropriate words. But what good did it do me, my true life, to hear my recitation acclaimed above those of all my contemporaries and schoolfellows? Was it not all so much smoke and wind? And was there no other way of training my mind and tongue? Would that my heart had been trained on your praises, O Lord, as they are found in the Scriptures. Would that it had been trained on your praises like a young vine on a trellis. Then it would not have been blighted by the empty conceits of the poets and left a prey to be torn up by the birds of heaven. For we have more ways than one of sacrificing to the rebel angels. But it is not surprising that I was drifting off towards these vanities and away from you, my God, considering what sort of men were held up to me as examples to imitate. These men would be filled with embarrassment if they were caught out in some lapse of grammar or pronunciation in describing some deed of theirs, even if the deed itself was not evil. If, however, they could tell an admiring audience of their immoral passions in suitably elegant and refined language, with a smooth flow of pure Latinity, they would be full of pride. You, O Lord, see all these things and are silent. For you are long-suffering and full of mercy and truth. But will you keep silent forever? Even now you are rescuing from the horrors of the abyss some soul that searches for you and thirsts to taste your joys, whose heart says to you, your face, O Lord, have I sought, your face will I seek again. For my mind is clouded by darkness and is far from your face. The road that leads us from you and back to you again is not one that we can measure or tread with our feet. The younger son in your story did not need horses or chariots or ships when he set out to squander his wealth in a far country. He did not grow wings and fly off in view of all or go striding on his way. But you, his father, who had been kind in giving him his inheritance when he set out, were kinder still when he came home empty-handed. The far country into which he departed was a state of mind, ruled by lusts full of darkness and cut off from your face. Look upon us, Lord God, with patience, and see how carefully the children of men observe the rules of spelling and pronunciation they have received from previous speakers of the language, while neglecting the eternal rules that lead to everlasting salvation, which they have received from you. If some speaker or teacher of the received pronunciation drops the H in the first syllable of human being, in contravention of the rules laid down by the grammarians, see how his fellow humans look askance at him, more so than if he were to hate one of his fellow men, in contravention of the laws laid down by you. It is as if he thought that any enemy could be more dangerous to him than the actual hatred he felt towards that enemy, or that by pursuing a feud with his enemy he could harm him more than he would harm his own heart by his feelings of enmity. The knowledge of how to read and write does not go deeper than the guilty knowledge that we are doing to others what we would not have done to ourselves, for that is written in our nature. You are hidden from us, O God, the only great one, dwelling on high in silence, and by your unrelenting law, you cast blindness as a punishment over our illicit desires. A man seeking to make a name for himself as an orator might attack his enemy in a speech full of hatred and malice, but even though the judge was a man like himself, even though the crowds of spectators were men like himself, he would take great care to ask them justly to condemn rather than to justly condemn their fellow man. This would be a mere slip of the tongue, but as for the fact that the madness into which his mind had fallen might lead to his fellow man's being removed from among men, he would not care a jot. It was on the threshold of this moral world that it was my unhappy lot to lie as a boy. This was the arena in which I was to fight, and I was more afraid of committing an error of grammar or pronunciation than I was of the feelings of jealousy that would arise in me if I made such a mistake and the others did not. I acknowledge and confess to you, my God, the ways in which I earned the praise of those around me, for in those days my notion of a good life was to win the approval of these people. I did not see the whirlpool of immorality into which I was cast out from your sight, For what in that moral world was more loathsome than I was, seeing as I incurred the disapproval even of my human spectators, deceiving with countless falsehoods my family tutor, my teachers, and my parents, with my love of playing games, my passion for the empty pageantry of the theater, and my restless desire to imitate the scenes I had seen enacted. I even stole from my parents' larder and table, sometimes prompted by sheer greed, and sometimes in order to have something to bribe the other boys to let me win in their games, despite the fact that they enjoyed them no less than I did. Even then, I was so much a slave of my vain desire to win that I often claimed victory by cheating. But what was it that I was so unwilling to have done to me, and denounced so fiercely if I detected it in others, and did the same just as willingly to others? If I was caught cheating and denounced by my friends, I would strike out sooner than give way. Is this the innocence of childhood? No, Lord, it is not. So it please you, my God. From tutors and schoolmasters, nuts, balls, and pet sparrows, to magistrates and kings, money, estates, and slaves, it is all the same. We grow up, and one set of cares is replaced by another. The schoolmaster's cane is replaced by punishments more severe. It was the humility symbolized by children's low physical stature that you, our King, enjoined when you declared, "Of such is the kingdom of heaven." But thanks be to you, O Lord our God, most high and mighty creator and ruler of the universe, even if it had been your will that I should be no more than a boy, for even then I had being and life and feeling. My wholeness, the imprint, that most hidden oneness from which I took my being, I guarded, and by an inner sense I watched over the integrity of my senses. My thoughts were small and of small things, yet I delighted in the truth. I shunned error. I grew in memory. I learned to use language and found pleasure in friendship, pain, sorrow, and ignorance. I fled. What was there in such a creature that was not worthy of wonder and praise? But all these things were my God's gifts to me. I did not give them to myself, but they are all good, and together they are what I am. Good is my Maker. He is my good, and I rejoice before Him in the good things He has given me, which made up my being even when I was a boy. My sin lay in this, that I sought pleasures, distinctions, and truths within myself and in the other objects of your creation, and in doing so I fell headlong into pain, disgrace, and error. Thanks be to you, my God, my sweetness, my glory, and my trust, for all the gifts you have given me. Preserve, I pray, these gifts, for thus you will preserve me. The things you have given me will grow and reach perfection, and I myself will be with you. For it is you who have given me my very being. Chin up, soldiers of the cross. Rebel against the world order, for the strong man has already been dethroned. And know that in the end, God will not just redeem His saints, He promises to avenge them. Listen here to the good news from our captain and our prince. Raise your heads, ye fatigued foxhole saints. A live report from Central Command is coming in. Revelations. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of the wrath has come, and who can withstand it?" Put your white on and get back to the fight. Christ is King. Hail to the King.